Here's another way of looking at it. So if you're looking at a computer, your computer crashes, we'll say. So you're working on your computer, and then you might think, well, are you actually working on your computer? And the question, the answer to that is, it depends on exactly what you mean by computer, and exactly what is this thing that's a computer. So actually, when you're working on a computer, what you generally see is only the screen, and you don't even see the screen. You see that tiny sub-element of the screen that contains those representational entities that are directly relevant to the area of the world that you're focusing on right now because you want something to happen. Okay, so really when you're interacting with the computer, you're just interacting with this tiny little part of it. And then the problem is, in order for that tiny little part to maintain its validity as a representational entity, all the things that you don't see about the computer have to work. Right? And then you might think, well, what don't you see about the computer? Well, that's what this diagram is supposed to be showing. So the first thing is, you don't see the elemental properties of the computer, and that would be its existence at a quantum level. And that actually turns out to be increasingly relevant for computer designers. Because, you know, you cannot specify the location and the momentum of a particle at a quantum level with 100% accuracy. And what that means is it actually has relevance. The little wires in computer chips are getting so small now that there's some reasonable probability that an electron you think will be in the wire is outside the wire. And that means they'll short out. So at some level of interaction, the quantum properties actually matter. Okay, so that's part of the computer you don't see. And then, well, the computer itself is made out of all these little parts that are as complex as little cities, and it's just packed with that. And what you don't know about that could fill whole volumes, and any of those things can, you know, malfunction at any moment, so that's a big problem. And then those micro parts are arranged into subcomponents. With a desktop, maybe your sound card is gone, or your video card is gone, or something that you could take out and replace if you could only specify the proper level of analysis. Or, you know, maybe you bought a lousy brand, and that's the problem. You bought some cheap computer that's made in a dismal factory, and the probability that it's going to be reliable is 0. And then you might ask, well, why is it that that brand is not reliable? And you might say, well, the economic system within which it was produced is corrupt, and so is the political system. And so as a consequence of that, people can get away with shoddy manufacturing, and that manifests itself as the fact that your computer crashes in the middle of an essay. And then you might say, well, what's the right level of resolution to solve that problem? And the answer to that is, that's not obvious. It depends on what you mean by solve it. Now, usually what you mean is do the minimum necessary to get the system back online so that you can return to your activities. But it's by no means obvious that that's always the right solution, and sometimes it isn't, because at some point you're going to say, well, I should just throw the computer away. And you know, if you own computers, that when to throw them away is actually a complicated problem. How many of you have like 3 or 4 old laptops lying around the house? Right. So like, why? Well, they still work. Well, do they really? And then a deeper question is, what makes you think that they're still laptops? And the answer to that is, well, they look like laptops, and that's also wrong. They look like laptops if you think that a box is a laptop, and it's not. And with computers, you can really see this, because you can have an entity that's fully functional, a laptop, and then if you just leave it on your desk and don't touch it for 5 years, or let's say 10 years, what is it then? Well, it's become so disconnected from the ecosystem that it's a part of that it might not be useful for anything anymore. You might not even be able to get it to work. And you know, most things around us don't change that fast, so we can perceive them in relatively simple forms, and they don't transform so quick that shows us that our perception is gone astray. But computers aren't like that. They transform so rapidly, you probably spend 1/5 of your time just trying to keep up with the transformations.
Do you think that even if a laptop ceases to be used, the anticipation in a person that it could be used as a laptop if they wanted to, does that make it stay a laptop?
Sure, well, it does to some degree. You know, the question is, do you actually use it? That's a first question. So, and that's actually the manner in which you test the validity of your perceptual theory, because I would say that a laptop that you don't use is actually not a laptop. It's just a hypothetical laptop. Now, and you see, I mean, I'm being picky about these sorts of things, but I'm doing that because we're trying to understand exactly how categories work, and it is not obvious. It's not obvious at all. So the problem is that the laptop actually transforms into a brick relatively slowly, and deciding when it's a laptop and when it's a brick is not obvious because it doesn't announce that, you know, it just doesn't stop working all of a sudden. It just works in a manner that's completely counterproductive, you know. And one of the things that's quite interesting is there's not a lot of evidence that the electronic revolution has increased productivity. And I think the reason for that is, how much time during the week do you suppose you spend just keeping your computer updated and making sure that you understand how it works? Like, would that be 10% of the time that you use the computer? Is that an unreasonable estimate? Like, what do you think? I mean, I think for me it's like 20% of my time. It's horrifying because I have quite a few computers, and you know, they're always doing weird things of one form or another. Even when I just leave them be, they'll update and then they won't work. Or, you know, I have a new computer and it's got such a high resolution screen that you can't use Photoshop on it because you can't see the menu items anymore. And Adobe has known about that for a whole year and hasn't fixed it. And so, like, there's always these weird little snakes popping up all over the place with something as complex as your computer, and battling them off, I think, destroys all the potential productivity that the tool was actually designed to produce. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly seems that way to me. So, okay, so the laptop, it's a funny entity too, because you can certainly see that it's connected directly to a very large network, right? And that's the internet, clearly. But partly that's an information portal, but partly the thing stays alive because of its connection to the internet, right? It's continually updating, it's continually being modified because it's plugged into something that's essentially a living system. And when you think about it as a laptop, you're just ignoring all of that. And you really can't, because you can't ignore all that, because it's there. It's even more real than, I kind of think of these things like leaves on a tree. The tree's the real thing. These are just leaves, and you know, they fall off, and then you have to, and then they're dead. So